It was supposed to be a night of celebration. High school graduation, the real beginning of a new chapter. But by the next morning, 3 women were simply gone. Their cars were still in the driveway, their purses and keys were inside the house, and the TV had been left on. The only sign that anything was wrong was a shattered porch light globe on the front step. They had vanished without a trace, leaving behind a mystery that would haunt their town for decades. This is the unsolved case of the Springfield 3. To really understand this mystery, you first have to know the people at its heart. 1717 East Delmar Street in Springfield, Missouri, wasn't just some random house, it was a home. The matriarch of that home was Cheryl Levitt. At 47, Cheryl was a hardworking single mother and a talented cosmetologist. Friends described her as dependable, a woman who lived a quiet, steady life. She just bought the house, a symbol of her independence that she was lovingly making her own. She was petite, just 5 feet tall, with short, light blonde hair and a warm presence. The night she disappeared, she was in the middle of a project, refinishing a wooden armoire, a detail that paints a picture of a life that was about to be inexplicably erased. Her daughter was 19-year-old Suzanne, but everyone knew her as Susie Streeter. Bubbly, outgoing, and fresh off the stage from her high school graduation, Susie was a vibrant contrast to her more reserved mother. Like her mom, she was petite, standing at 5'2", with striking, shoulder-length bleached blonde hair. Susie was planning to follow in her mother's footsteps and attend cosmetology school. Rounding out the trio was 18-year-old Stacy McCall, one of Susie's closest friends. Stacy had also just graduated from Kickapoo High School. She was the responsible one, the friend her parents, Janice and Stu, could always count on. Standing 5'3" with dark blonde hair, Stacy was known for her meticulous nature. That night, after a long evening of graduation parties, a last-minute change of plans would place her at the house on Delmar Street, sealing her fate alongside Susie and Cheryl. These weren't just names on a missing persons poster. They were a mother, a daughter, and a friend, 3 women with lives, families, and futures, all of which came to an abrupt and silent end in the early morning hours of June 7, 1992. The story of their disappearance begins on what should have been one of the happiest days of Susie and Stacy's young lives, Saturday, June 6, 1992. It was graduation day. After the ceremony, the girls went off to a few graduation parties, a classic American rite of passage. Their original plan was to drive 45 minutes south to Branson to stay overnight and visit an amusement park. But as the night wore on, plans changed. Around 10:30 p.m., Stacy called her mother, Janice, letting her know they'd decided against a long drive and would stay at their friend Janelle Kirby's house instead. They continued party hopping until they landed at a friend's house where the party got a little too loud. After police broke it up around 1:40 a.m., Susie and Stacy drove their separate cars to Janelle's house, arriving around 2 a.m. But Janelle's home was crowded with family, so her mom had to make a makeshift bed on the floor. Feeling it was too cramped, Susie and Stacy made a fateful decision. They told Janelle they'd be more comfortable at Susie's house on Delmar Street. It was the last time any of their friends would ever see them. They left Janelle's house sometime after 2 a.m., likely arriving at 1717 East Delmar Street around 2:15 a.m. Cheryl was already home. She'd been on the phone with a friend around 11:15 p.m., talking about painting her armoire. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. The timeline between 2:15 a.m. and 8 a.m. the next morning is a complete black hole. It's in this roughly 6-hour window that all 3 women vanished. The next morning, Sunday, June 7th, friends started calling to finalize their plans for the day. Janelle Kirby began calling the house around 8 a.m. but got no answer. Stacy's mother, Janice McCall, also grew worried as the morning stretched on without a word from her ever-dependable daughter. By late morning, Janelle and her boyfriend, Mike, drove over to the house. What they found was a scene that was strangely normal, yet deeply unsettling. All 3 cars, Cheryl's, Susie's, and Stacy's, were parked outside. The front door was unlocked. On the porch, the glass globe of the porch light was shattered. Thinking he was just being helpful, Mike swept up the broken glass, unknowingly destroying what might have been the crime scene's most critical piece of evidence. Inside, the house was silent. The television was on, its screen showing only static. Cheryl and Susie's little Yorkshire Terrier, Cinnamon, was there, pacing and agitated, the only living witness to whatever happened. Chillingly, the women's purses, with all their cash, makeup, and keys, were all found together on the living room floor. Stacy's clothes from the day before were there, too. Everything they needed to leave the house was still there. But the women themselves were gone. While Janelle was inside, the phone rang. She answered it. A man on the other end made what police later called sexual innuendos. Startled, Janelle hung up. The man immediately called back with more obscene comments. She hung up again, dismissing it as a disturbing but probably unrelated prank call. Later that afternoon, after hours of trying to reach her daughter, a frantic Janice McCall arrived. The scene confirmed her worst fears. As she looked around the empty home, she noticed the answering machine was blinking. She pressed play. In the stress of the moment, after hearing what she would later describe only as a strange message, the message was accidentally erased, a common flaw in answering machines of that era. Police were devastated, believing that message may have held a vital clue. By that evening, police had officially launched their investigation. But the crime scene had already been visited by nearly 20 concerned friends and family members, each person potentially contaminating any evidence that might have been left behind. The women had vanished from an unlocked house that showed no signs of forced entry, leaving all their worldly possessions behind. The mystery of the Springfield Three had begun. When Springfield police took over the scene on the night of June 7th, they were faced with a puzzle that had almost no pieces. The house at 1717 East Del Mar was not a typical crime scene. There were no obvious signs of a struggle. Nothing of value was taken. In fact, Cheryl's purse contained a good amount of cash, completely untouched. Her bed looked like it had been slept in. The only things truly out of place were the shattered porch light and the eerie absence of the three women. Police believed this was an abduction, not a case of three women just walking away. The fact that they vanished at once without a fight suggested a planned event. Maybe the attacker used a trick to get inside, or maybe it was someone the women knew and trusted. The investigation's biggest hurdle from the start was the contaminated crime scene. Well-meaning friends and family had cleaned, tidied, and walked through the house for hours before police could secure it, compromising any forensic evidence like fingerprints or DNA. The few clues they did have were baffling. First, there was the shattered porch light. Was it broken by an abductor trying to approach the house in darkness? Or did it break during a struggle? Without the glass shards, a detailed analysis was impossible. Then there were those bizarre phone calls Janelle answered. Police were never able to determine if they were connected to the case or just a cruel, coincidental prank. And what about the message Janice accidentally erased? Police considered its loss a major blow to the investigation. The investigation quickly expanded. Police interviewed friends, family, and ex-boyfriends. They learned that Susie was supposed to provide a statement to police about her ex-boyfriend, Dustin Rekla, who had recently been involved in vandalizing a local mausoleum. This led to a theory that her disappearance could have been retaliation to keep her quiet. Rekla was in the area that night, but no evidence ever directly linked him or his friends to the crime. Another strange tip came from someone who claimed they saw Susie driving a van around 6:30 on the morning of June 7th. The witness said Susie looked distressed while a man shouted at her from the back. Others reported seeing a similar van, but no one could recall the license plate. The lead ultimately went nowhere. On New Year's Eve of 1992, a promising lead surfaced when a man called the America's Most Wanted hotline, claiming to have prime knowledge of the abductions. But just as the operator tried to connect him to Springfield investigators, the call was tragically dropped. Despite public pleas for him to call back, he never did. For years, the investigation continued with thousands of tips, leading police on searches across multiple states. But every single lead turned into a dead end. In 1997, 5 years after they vanished, Cheryl Levitt and Susie Streeter were declared legally dead. The case of the Springfield Three had officially gone cold. In a case with no bodies and no real physical evidence, theories are all that's left. Over the decades, speculation has centered on two main possibilities: a targeted attack by someone they knew, or a random abduction by a predator. One theory is that this was a targeted event, that one of the women was the primary target, and the other two were just in the wrong place at the wrong time. Susie is often seen as the most likely target. Her connection to the mausoleum vandalism case provided a clear motive for someone to silence her. But while police looked hard at this angle, they could never build a solid case. The other major theory is a random abduction by an experienced serial offender. The efficiency of the crime, 3 women taken without anyone hearing a thing, suggests a predator who knew what they were doing. Maybe someone followed the girls home from a party, or used a trick to get inside the house without a struggle. This brings us to the most prominent person of interest in the case, Robert Craig Cox. At the time, Cox was living in Springfield and already had a chilling criminal history, including a kidnapping conviction. When police first questioned him, Cox said he was at church with his girlfriend the morning the women vanished. She backed up his story, but later recanted, telling police Cox had told her to lie. After being imprisoned in Texas for another crime, Cox began making cryptic statements to journalists. In 1997, he claimed he knew the 3 women were murdered and that their bodies would never be found. He told reporters he'd reveal everything after his mother passed away. But was he a killer playing games, or just a narcissist craving attention? He never provided any verifiable details, and police have never had enough evidence to charge him. Cox is eligible for parole in 2025, a fact that looms large over the case. Another name that has surfaced is Larry Dwayne Hall, a suspected serial killer known for traveling the Midwest for Civil War reenactments. There happened to be a reenactment near Springfield that very weekend. Hall is suspected in the murders of numerous young women, but again, no concrete evidence has ever tied him to this specific case. The theories all just circled the same black hole of missing information. As years turned into decades, the case of the Springfield 3 remained frozen in time. The investigation never officially stopped, but it slowed to a trickle. The case remains open, and a reward fund of around $42,000 is still available for information that leads to an arrest. New technologies have offered glimmers of hope. DNA from the women's family members is on file, ready for a match if remains are ever discovered. But without a crime scene, there's little to test. One of the most persistent theories involves the Cox South Hospital parking garage. A tipster claimed the women's bodies were buried in the foundation. In 2007, a crime reporter used ground-penetrating radar on a section of the garage, and the scan revealed 3 anomalies that were consistent in size and shape with a burial site. This generated huge public interest, but police were skeptical. They pointed out that such anomalies are common, and without more credible evidence, they have declined to excavate the site due to the immense cost and disruption. The emotional toll on the families has been immeasurable. For decades, Stacy's mother, Janice McCall, was a fierce advocate for her daughter and the other women, a public face for the family's unrelenting grief. She never gave up hope, but the years of false starts and dead ends were a heavy burden to carry. Today, more than 30 years later, the house on East Delmar Street still stands, a silent monument to the mystery that began there. The files are still open, tips are still vetted, and the hope for a breakthrough, however faint, endures. But for now, the case remains stalled, a haunting fixture in American true crime. 3 women, Cheryl Levitt, Susie Streeter, and Stacy McCall, walked into a home and vanished from the face of the earth. They left behind cars, cash, and a little dog who was the only witness. The only clue to whatever violence took place was a shattered porch light. For over 30 years, their disappearance has confounded investigators and captivated a nation. Was it a planned act of retaliation? Or a random crime committed by a predator lurking in the night? Suspects like Robert Craig Cox have offered only cryptic clues wrapped in manipulative games. Theories point to secret burials under parking garages and in forgotten fields, but the ground has yet to give up its secrets. The case of the Springfield 3 is more than just a cold case. It's a story about the agonizing pain of not knowing. It's about a community haunted by a mystery and families who have lived in a state of suspended grief for a generation. Despite decades of work, we are no closer to knowing what truly happened in the early morning hours of June 7, 1992. The truth remains just out of reach, lost to time and silence.